organize this very powerful webinar. Let me start by welcoming the attendees for taking time to be with us this afternoon for this webinar. I would like to first, as usual, say that this is one of the series of webinars from NYA in response to our effort towards curtailing COVID-19 pandemic. But for this webinars, precisely for this month, our focus is actually looking into the future, because the general perception of the public is that as if COVID-19 is no longer with us, but we know it's actually with us. And of course, because of that feeling, we feel that we should now start looking into the future to start sensitizing both the public, the government, and other relevant stakeholders that pandemic seems to be over, but in actual sense, it may not be over. So we should start looking into the future, preparing ourselves to see what we can do to get ready in case of future, so that we are not yet caught unawares by any future pandemic. So that's why today we want to look into the future, and precisely we want to look at more or less not classical health issue per se. We want to look at it from the mathematical and geospatial perspective, so that we can see this thing from an entirely different perspective. And of course, this thing is also very relevant to the public health system. Molecular modeling and geospatial data, they are very important, that will allow us predict, of course, and also control future pandemic. And that's why today we invited this very, very powerful speakers. Professor Okuonghae from University of Benin is very renowned renowned expert in mathematical modeling, and is here with us. He will tell us what they do as far as modeling the future pandemic is concerned. And of course, Mr. Nazir Halliru is an expert in geospatial data, who is actually a country manager is actually Nigerian manager for the GRID3, which is a very renowned international body responsible or involved in geospatial data collection and so on. So, and he has been working along especially with respect to the public health system, and is well versatile and well experienced as far as that is concerned. So that's where we are, and I welcome everyone to all the attendees. I'm sure we are going to have a very rewarding experience. We are going to hear from the expert as to what we should look at into the future. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors, largely the COVID-19 Rapid Grant Fund, for giving NYA the opportunity to the grant first, and then the opportunity for us to host this webinar. Once again, thank you. I'm sure we're going to have a very memorable webinar. Thank you so much.
Special thanks to you, sir. Mr. President, thanks for that wonderful opening address. So we shall proceed now to the biography of Mr. Nazir Halliru. Distinguished Mr. Halliru,
I think you are making a mistake. You swap.
There's a mistake somewhere there. There's a mistake there. There's a mistake there. So, okay. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Asking if you can see my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen now? So we shall proceed now to the biography of Mr. Nazir Halliru.
We can see her.
As a member of the GRID3 Nigeria National Secretary, Mr. Halliru collaborates closely with the National Steering and Technical Committees to strengthen the country's policy by utilizing the most crucial geospatial data layers on population, administrative boundaries, settlements, and infrastructure to address urgent issues with health, educational, and food security. Prior to joining GRID3, Mr. Halliru held a number of positions with various companies, including those of State Coordinator and Manager of the Health Delivery System, with eHealth Africa Northwest Regional Coordinator in Nigeria, with Public Health Services and Solutions, that's PHSX, Management Consultant with Johns Hopkins International Vaccine Access Center, IVAC, Nigerian Programs, and State Coordinator with Public Health Services and Solutions. Mr. Halliru was a member of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19's Evidence and Synthesis Group, which assisted the Nigerian government in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Halliru is now a member of the National Technical Working Group, TWG, for the launch of the COVID-19 vaccine. Mr. Halliru holds an advanced degree in econometrics from SRM University with a specialization in geospatial data application for development. Also, Mr. Halliru graduated from the Bayero University, Kano, with a degree in economics. I consider it to be a privilege to invite Mr. Nazir Halliru to speak with us on the future pandemic response. That's application of geospatial data in Nigeria. You're welcome, sir.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Isaac. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen. Okay. Yes. You can see your screen, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I really appreciate your invite in order for me to come and share lessons and also share perspectives around how we can address future pandemic as a country in terms of the application of geospatial data. So my presentation will dwell on the future pandemic response, but learning from experience on how we respond to the COVID-19 vaccination in Nigeria or COVID-19 outbreak in Nigeria using geospatial data. So in the next few minutes or 20 minutes allotted to me, I'll make sure that I be up to the time allocated. I'm going to walk you through this outline. The first thing is to look into the core geospatial data layers for Nigeria, what is available, what we have used, and what is currently available for other users to utilize for the COVID-19 response and other outbreaks. The second aspect of the presentation will look into the geospatial data approach to COVID-19 response in Nigeria. How do we utilize the geospatial data layers to address or to respond to COVID-19 in Nigeria? And the last and the third point is to look into the applications of geospatial data for future epidemics or pandemic response. So in this case, we'll be looking at what are those things that we've learned, as a country from the COVID-19 response, and how do we, utilize what we have, in order to respond to any, epidemic in country. So the first aspect talks about the geospatial data layers. So in Nigeria, under the GRID3 program, GRID3 refers to georeference infrastructure and demographic data for development. And if you know about GRID3, you probably know that we leverage on data technology, data science and data integration innovations, to put pragmatic data solutions in place that generate high value impacts and that we do, in partnership with government, technical partners, as well as international organizations. In this case, we focus on high-resolution maps or population modeling, in terms of building footprint and settlements. We also look into health facilities, schools, and other key points of interest, and as well the subnational boundaries. And in our approach, we also integrate this data, this data layers into practical data collection workflows. How do we collect additional data in order to fuel our strategic objectives, and also being, participatory in terms of data cleaning, in terms of data modeling, and lastly, in terms of data use case. So in this case, we generate use cases that are fit to purpose, of several innovations. One of them is the health. And then we also delve into education. We also delve into other key sectors across the country or across, based on specific country needs. So in this case, our conversations on this will leverage on the aspect of COVID-19 response. How do we use this data, or these different core data layers in terms of responding to COVID-19 outbreak? So I'm going to share with you now some of the experiences on twofold that we have responded to COVID-19 as a country in Nigeria. During the outbreak of COVID-19 in in early 2020, for Nigeria, we use some of these core geospatial data layers in order to determine how we can respond to it through the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. So we collaborated with FRIME. FRIME is supporting the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation by producing raster data layers at 1 kilometer radius, high resolution for different elements of risk and vulnerability to COVID-19 for 5 countries, including Nigeria. Other countries include Ethiopia, Kenya, Pakistan, and India. So from this slide, we can understand that we've generated different data layers, first looking at the exposure. In this case, categorizing or modeling population at different administrative units at ward level, local government and state level, and also at national level to see how many people are exposed due to community density, due to proximity to others, within the household. You can understand maybe across slums that we have in Nigeria, in various states, and how does this translate into water, sanitation, and hygiene mobility. So it model population that high risk into the exposure to get affected to COVID-19. The second data layer or risk layer that we generated then was around the health facility access. So we understand there are a lot of population that don't have access to health facilities, that do not have access in order to kind of reach the population, or population reaching the health facilities for them to access care. So in this case, we look at 3 core components. One is the accessibility, usage, and also the capacity of those health facilities to really inform decisions. So the other layer is the communication access. So in this case, we look at communication access into connectivity, access to media, consumption of media. So we understand that there are populations that do not have access to any form of media, either traditional, conventional, or online media, to get information on what are the current happenings around the COVID-19 outbreak in country, and then what do they need to do, as individuals in order to protect themselves and protect their families and loved ones, not to get infected with COVID, and what are those, sanitary measures they need to take in order to, keep themselves safe. The second to the last layer was the socioeconomic vulnerability. COVID has taught us so many lessons. One of them is, people losing their jobs, people losing access to, food, housing, or even issues around financial inclusion. So we use the population estimate to also, with additional surveys, to model population that are socioeconomic vulnerable. So looking at indicators such as socioeconomic status, housing type, food security, financial inclusion, and domestic violence. And the last point is comorbidities. We understand that during the COVID outbreak in 2020, people are more severe if they have any pre-existing health conditions. And in this case, we are looking at people having maybe the elderly, 50 or 60 years, people with any respiratory issues, or people with diabetes or any general health conditions. So that could be very, very vulnerable. So we share these data layers with the government in order for them to have perspectives on how they can respond to COVID-19. So this is an example looking at it at the national level. So the risk layers are from 1 to 5. The darker colors you can see are people that are more highly at risk, and the lighter colors indicate people, that are less, a risk condition. So in this case, this data set, informed policy decisions at the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, and also informs decisions within the government, to respond to socioeconomic vulnerability. Like for the socioeconomic vulnerable, you may recall in Nigeria when there were, decisions on how to share palliatives and who are those populations that need those palliatives most. So we look at this at different administrative units, at what local government, state, and national level. So this is the other layers that I've mentioned, the comorbidities and communication access. So drawing lessons from what we have seen from responding to COVID before the arrival of the vaccines, the country also look into strategies on responding to COVID when the vaccines arrive. So how do we ensure that we reach those populations? How do we ensure that we target the most vulnerable people in order to take the vaccines rightly to them, for them to be able to, get protected? So here we can see is a local government area catchment map indicating vaccination sites and population distribution, and that comorbidity risk layer that I mentioned. It also, through a series of engagements with the government, we created these maps across the 774 local governments in country in order to use the maps for micro planning, for distributing vaccines, for distributing vaccination teams to reach the target population, and to also ensure that the vaccination teams are within 2-kilometer radius of the population. So in this case, covering the entire population. And zooming into the map, you can see, we have the population density, we have locations of primary healthcare centers, we have locations of secondary healthcare facilities, we have locations of tertiary healthcare facilities, and schools, settlements, and other boundaries. And then we can see population density. So in this case, the population density here describes, where people are more concentrated, and how do you reach them in order to, take the vaccines, or maybe create additional sites for them to be able to receive those vaccines. So we have the 2-kilometer radius, 5-kilometer radius, and as well 10-kilometer radius through which these vaccines will be distributed. So drawing on lessons also in terms of uptake of those vaccines. Currently, we are still recording very low coverage in terms of taking these vaccines and in terms of population accepting these vaccines. So there are a lot of issues around low vaccine demand. And as a country, how do we use geospatial technology in order to improve, those vaccination rates? And one of it, apart from other factors that influence decisions on, accepting the vaccines, we understand that taking the vaccines to where people live is very, very critical. So we generated this optimization site that governments at different levels, national, local governments, as well as state level, can use them in order to take the vaccines directly. So this is a map of Ondo State, indicating different points where vaccination teams need to, situate their vaccination sites. So in this case, with an approximately population that could be reached, and also an estimated number of priorities or estimated number of sites to be established, across the state. So this is in line with the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency's plan to expand the COVID-19 vaccination through establishing, various vaccination sites. So in this case, we look into different priorities. Priority 1, indicating the more number of people to be reached, and priority 2, indicating the less number of people to be reached compared to priority 1, and lastly, priority 3, which will reach, other lesser population. So drawing from all these lessons, from experience on how the COVID-19 has taught us, so many lessons as a country and as a program, we have, some solutions, or we have some applications or use cases through which we think, if applied appropriately by government and other relevant stakeholders, we will be able to, address future pandemics or future epidemics within the maybe a state or a local government or a country. So we propose various solutions to how we feel this is going to address this. So one of it is the issue around having, a proper database of all healthcare facilities in Nigeria. We need to really map our health facilities. We need to know where our health facilities are, and we need to also determine their functionality. How many health facilities do we have, and how many are functionable? So in this case, looking at their functionality across the country, and also looking at their availability. We've learned lessons. Some of these health facilities, when government tried to convert them into isolation centers, there were a lot of issues around space, around equipment, around other oxygens, beds. So there were really a lot of issues then. So we were lucky that the COVID has not really led to, of course, there are a lot of mortality rates from COVID related cases, but compared to other countries that have lost millions of people. So this has taught us lessons in Nigeria that we really need to equip our healthcare facilities and map them throughout the country so that we can respond to any epidemic. The second aspect is surveillance. So surveillance is very, very critical. How do we improve, data collection of any outbreak, be it measles outbreak, be it malaria, be it any other, disease outbreak? How do we ensure that we collect geospatial data? We collect points of where this outbreak emanates from, especially from the settlement. So we can use our settlement data. Maybe can we mute third person? So we can use our settlement data in order to, collect the point location. So once we have the point location of that case, we will be able to quickly generate the population that are within that. Maybe please can we mute? Okay, thank you. So once we have the point location of where that case is coming from, we will be able to determine the population within that vicinity, maybe within 1 kilometer radius or within 2 kilometer radius, depending on how we want to address it. So in this case, we'll be able to establish different approaches in order to curtail the spread of the virus. and also protect people that are within the kilometer radius of that. The other aspects, which is the last point in this case, is around artificial intelligence and machine learning models. We understand that AI has played a very, very critical role in terms of responding to COVID-19 and in terms of, arriving at various key solutions to responding to COVID in Nigeria and other countries. So how do we strengthen the comprehensive data streams from various organizations, quality data set in order to help respond to COVID-19 or any future epidemics or pandemic? So one of them is, like I mentioned, the AI machine learnings that we've used to generate the risk population. So there are multiple streams of data that fit into decision making, and including health management information system, routine disease specific records, CT information, latency operation data, and satellite imagery. And one other aspect, determining what data set are appropriate to inform policy decisions, as well as understanding the aim of this decision is very, very crucial if AI is effectively being used. Additionally, a greater understanding of which health and ecological data should be monitored is also needed, especially data related to, zoonotic origin disease, a precursor to the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence is greater standardization in health data. In this case, we also need a robust policy frameworks are needed to create environments, that include regulatory measures as well as incentive programs and research stream to address public health priorities. So I think these are really very, very important in terms of us responding to any future epidemics. Thank you so much. I think I'm really on time. Thank you, and over.
Special thanks to you, Mr. Halliru, for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, sir. We really appreciate the content and the value of the information you've shared with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So we shall wait for a while for others to send their question forward. At this point, we need to invite Professor Daniel to our midst. So I can see the probe is around. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. I consider this to be an opportunity to introduce to you the second speaker in person of Professor Daniel Okuonghae. Distinguished Professor Daniel works at the Department of Mathematics at the University of Benin, Benin City, Nigeria. At the University of Benin, Professor Daniel earned his first degree in the year 2000, which is a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Mathematics. Professor Daniel studied for his Masters of Science in Mathematical Modeling and Scientific Computing at the University of Oxford from 2003 to 2004. Professor Daniel earned his doctorate in 2008 from the University of Benin in Nigeria. As a mathematical modeler, Professor Daniel employs mathematical models and techniques to shed light on the operation of dynamical systems that occur in the actual world. In light of this, he had thoroughly investigated the dynamics of population affected by infectious diseases like TB, HIV, syphilis, cholera, and polio. From the findings of the study by Professor Daniel, he has derived effective public health control measures that will lead to a decline in the incidence of many diseases. More specifically, Professor Daniel explored the nature of real-life situations using statistical models like generalized linear models. The record shows that the Journal of Chaos, Soliton, and Fractal, Pergamo, published Professor Daniel's studies findings on the development of a mathematical model for COVID-19 population dynamics in Lagos, Nigeria. That is exactly on June 25, 2020. The factors that signally influence the dynamics of the model when the infected population and the production numbers are utilized as response functions were identified by global sensitivity analysis. The incidence and prevalence of COVID-19 will significantly decline according to the numerical simulation of the model if the case detection rate of symptomatic persons can be increased to around 0.8 per day and roughly 55% of the population comply with the social distance rule. This is another findings by Professor Daniel. Professor Daniel has successfully organized more than 10 workshops within the past 3 years, in collaboration with several academic societies in Nigeria, the Mathematical Computation Statistical Biology Group, and the Department of Mathematics, University of Benin, Nigeria. These workshops cover topics like data analysis, visualization with MATLAB, 4D model fitting using MATLAB, empirical modeling, dynamic system theory, industrial modeling, and mathematical modeling. At this point, I consider it to be a privilege to invite to present to you Professor Daniel to speak on the topic mathematical modeling and the COVID-19 pandemic, past, present, and preparedness for the future. You're welcome, Professor, to our Mr.
Thank you very much.
Daniel?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly, sir.
All right, thank you so much for having me on. I want to thank members of the NYA here, those who are not members. It's a privilege to share my little knowledge on physics. Let me just share my screen so that we begin.
Yes, sir, you can proceed, sir. You can share your screen, sir.
Okay. Okay. All right. I hope you can see what I'm saying.
So you can go to the next slide, sir. What we are seeing here is black.
Okay. Comment. Network here is not too.
Okay, yes, sir. We can see your screen, sir.
Okay.
We can see your screen. Prof, we have the opinion maybe you can disable your camera, your video camera, so that because of network.
All right.
Disable your camera, then we can see your screen, sir.
Okay. Okay, fine. So we've all heard the title, and I hope I can complete this in 20 minutes. I'll try the best I can. I like having my discussions begin with this quote from Sir Nadros, medical doctor and an epidemiologist. Says, as a matter of fact, all epidemiology concerned with the variation of disease from time to time or place to place must be considered mathematically, however many variables are implicated. It is to be considered scientifically at all. I was quite surprised that a medical doctor, a well-renowned one at that, could see the importance of mathematical modeling in understanding the dynamics of infectious diseases. And what you see on your screen is a picture of Sir Nadros in his lab. He won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1902 for successfully investigating the dynamics of malaria. And the interesting thing about this man's work was that he used mathematical modeling to understand the dynamics of malaria and was able to clearly state that you can eradicate malaria from the population without killing every single mosquito. That was amazing at that time, 1902, the early 1900s. I mean, someone who is not a mathematician saying that he has come up with a threshold that can help you eliminate malaria without destroying all the mosquitoes. Because before then, everybody thought, no, for you to eradicate malaria, you just have to get rid of every single anopheles mosquito. I mean, but of course, we know the ecological importance of these mosquitoes. And the man said, no, you don't have to do that. I have come up with a threshold. He did that through mathematics. And this is one of those motivations I have had over the years that have made me enjoy this work that I do, trying to use mathematics to understand the dynamics and pattern of infectious diseases. Now, before I begin, I just like to start on a very friendly note, on a very soft and happy note. Otherwise, you are going to see some unpleasant equations later on during this talk. So let's start on a very light note. Now, this is a workshop that was organized by DIMAX and SACIMA in South Africa. They arranged for about 20 graduate students from Africa and 20 from the US to gather in Cape Town, South Africa in 2007 for a modeling workshop, 3 weeks. It was an exciting workshop. And it was nice meeting people. All of these people you see here are doing very well in their various fields. You can see me behind there. And many of them are doing so well in their modeling areas. And it gives me joy that we're able to use mathematics so well at this time. Now, it's still on that program in DIMAC. That's when I met Professor Okuonghae for the first time. That's the man you see on the left. And this is me here. It's a bit dark, discussing with him. He's a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences and also a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Science. And on the right, to see us meeting again after a decade in Kano for our workshop. Now, this is one of the most exciting moments of my life because this was when the union organizes the largest gathering when it comes to people discussing lung health. And the 45th conference was held in Barcelona in 2014. And for the first time, they had to include a symposium on mathematical modeling for tuberculosis. It was an amazing thing. And we were surprised that medical doctors, epidemiologists, public health officials are interested in seeing how mathematics could play a role in helping people understand the dynamics of TB and even come up with a solution to it. And you will see me here. This was one of the nights during the conference where we were sitting close to the Mediterranean Sea. And those of you who are in mathematical biology, you should know this woman. This is Professor Dennis Kirshner. Interestingly, she's a microbiologist, and at the same time, at the point in time, she became the president of the Society for Mathematical Biology, which is our global body. And many of them you see on this picture are actually epidemiologists, and they were happy to see us, and we had a nice time with them. And this is when I was making my presentation during that conference. It was an amazing thing for us as mathematicians to present models to those in public health and see how useful these models can be. Now, this is my first connection with the NYA. This was in 2016 when I was receiving the NYA Professor Daniel Okuonghae Young Scientist Prize in Biomedical Sciences. This is Professor Daniel Okuonghae, he's late now. And over here you see Professor Tomori. At the time, Professor Tomori was the president of the Nigerian Academy of Sciences, while Professor Kuku was the president of the African Academy of Sciences. So it was nice meeting with the NYA at that time in Sheraton. And since then, I've always loved associating with this body. All right, so let's go now to the business of the day. We live in a world that is very dynamic. Everything changes very quickly. Diseases, agriculture, anything we do. And for centuries, man have tried to see if he can eliminate most of the infectious diseases affecting us. We came up with things like sanitation, antibiotics, vaccination. But we find out that these disease agents keep evolving, keep re-emerging. And for a developing country like Nigeria, infectious diseases have become like a big problem for us. And that is why mathematical models have become very useful tools in assisting public health officials and epidemiologists understand the cause of the dynamics of an infectious disease and see how we can bring the disease under control. Now, these are some of the usefulness of some of the uses of mathematical models. I can't go through all of them now because of time, but I just want to talk about one or two. One of the importance of the models we formulate is to assess quantitative conjectures about a disease. Quantitative conjectures about a disease. For example, if I'm going to apply a particular control measure to a population and I don't have enough resources, how do I apportion my resources to that population? Okay, so with the model, you could actually work that out. You could test theories. You could test theories regarding a disease. For example, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we didn't have a good understanding of what was going on. I'm going to talk about that much more later. But we were able to formulate models that tested a few theories we were hearing at that time so that we can provide a guide to public health officials. And of course, one of the benefits, again, of models we formulate is to provide early estimates of thresholds. Very, very important, as you are going to see later on in this talk. If you don't provide this threshold as quickly as possible to the public health people, then it's very difficult for them to plan. Otherwise, we're going to have very shoddy planning or very shoddy application of materials. And at the end of the day, we will not achieve a result of reducing the disease burden within the population. Now, what do public health experts want. When there is an outbreak, and I'm going to use my experience with the COVID-19 as an example. When it started, I had an interaction with a member of the presidential task force, and we were discussing, and I had to do some little work and send to them at that time. And during the meningitis outbreak of a few years ago in the north, I also spoke with the Epidemiologist General of Nigeria. I think he's presently based in Switzerland, WHO office. And we discussed how these models also assist them in their control measures over there. So what they want is, first of all, we need to get some threshold. The most important of them is the reproduction number. All right, so this is just a measure of the number of new cases that an infected person would come up with, or will affect the number of secondary cases that an affected person will have over a particular period of time. And they're also interested in how quickly the spread is going. When are we going to attain a peak? It's very important. There is no way an epidemic or even a pandemic can come to a halt without achieving a peak. So that's one of those things we want to know. How do I achieve this peak, and when are we going to achieve the peak? And we need to estimate a few things like the expected number of infections and even disease-induced deaths. All of this we can do with our models. Now, when you give that to a mathematician now looks at the abstractness of the problem. All of what you're saying on this board is not meant for those who are actually not mathematicians, because these are mathematical tools that I will now have to use to solve the problem that the epidemiologist wants me to solve. All these are various mathematical tools. And some of the beautiful characterizations we normally carry out, analysis we normally carry out are listed here. I want to talk about this one that we call the Hopf bifurcation. Now, in this case, I'm interested in investigating what could cause the disease to become periodic within a given population. All right, so COVID-19 has come, is still around us, although at a low level, low burden, but is it possible that it could come back again and becomes periodic? So like Lassa fever, the way Lassa fever is, I can use this technique to find. So these are just some of the mathematical techniques that we use. Now, before I jump into the COVID issue, there are just a few things I need to clarify, because I know I'm talking to the general audience, so I won't be too technical here. When we go on to formulate models to solve or to understand the dynamics of a particular disease, there are several things we consider. I'm going to talk about a few of them here. We have to make sure that epidemiologically you are correct. Now, this is a challenge because those in the field, those epidemiologists in the field, the public health people in the field, we rely on them to give us correct information. And sometimes they will tell you, oh, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough information. But I have to still go ahead and do my work. I must formulate my model and come up with solutions that are reasonable. Then we'll talk about assumptions as well. We have to make sure these assumptions are reasonable and biologically justifiable. Then you talk about the parameter values. Again, this is highly dependent on the data set you have, which again falls back to the epidemiologists and those in the public health sector. For vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue, and so on, it's important that we are very careful in deciding how we choose the parameter values we use for the vectors. All right, because they don't behave the same way. For example, we know that the Anopheles mosquito causes malaria, but the Aedes aegypti causes Zika. Now, if I pick a parameter value for Aedes aegypti, can I use that for the Anopheles mosquito? That could be a problem because entomologically, they may not behave the same way. Okay, so these are just factors we consider when you're modeling. Now, let's go to the COVID issue, which is the main talk. So we are aware of all these facts now. Started in Wuhan, December of 2019. Before you know it, it became so serious. Of the world became a pandemic. And Nigeria announced its index case on 27th of February 2020. And Lagos announced its own case 26 March 2020. And before you know it, Lagos became the epicenter. Now, this is a comparison of the 3 human coronavirus pandemics we have had. Although the first 2 wasn't too major, the SARS-CoV and the MERS-CoV simply means Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Started from Jordan in Saudi Arabia and affected only 27 countries. The SARS-CoV, the one we normally call SARS, started in China, 29 countries affected. But SARS-CoV-2, which is COVID-19, Wuhan, China, 220 countries affected. And at the moment, as of today, about 543 million cases have been confirmed and over 6 million deaths have been confirmed. So it's really a problem and it's something that has to be addressed. Like the title of my talk shows, I'm talking about how mathematical modelers have been able to assist public health officials manage this problem. And it's important we look at what happened in the past, the present, and then we can now talk about the future. Now, what happened in the past? By past, I mean at the beginning of the outbreak, let's say early 2020, up till when the vaccines came up. At the beginning, all we were hearing is non-pharmaceutical control measures. That's all we're hearing, because there was no cure for the disease. So they were telling us, maintain social distancing, wear face mask, wash your hand. When people were not cooperating, then they came down with the hammer, which we refer to as the total lockdown. So everybody should stay at home. But funny enough, it still didn't stop the increase. At the time, we didn't have a well-defined treatment protocol. I mean, nothing was universally acceptable. We're seeing all sorts of things on the news, even on international media. People were telling you use chloroquine, some take vitamin C, some say drink lime and lemon juice, and so on and so forth. So different things were happening. Quarantine was the order of the day. Isolation centers were hurriedly and in some cases haphazardly put in place, like we saw in this country. Another problem we had, which was affecting us as modelers, was we didn't have enough data. But we had to work. We had to work because those in public health, like I said, needed very, very quick information on how places they could control what is going on. This is my first contribution to COVID-19 modeling. In fact, this was born out of the discussions I had with the NCDC and members of that presidential panel. Since I couldn't travel to Abuja, we're discussing mostly by phone and Zoom. And I came up with some nice results from this work. Now, this is one of the unpleasant things I said you will see. But don't worry yourself. Those of you who are mathematicians, don't worry about what you are saying. But this is just a model that we had to come up with at that time to help us quickly gain understanding into what was going on. What you have here is just a base model. It's a model that breaks down the population into different groups. But what is important to me is that at the time we were doing this work, those in microbiology and the other areas of medicine had already understood a little thing about COVID-19, and they understood that asymptomatic cases were in the population, and these ones could spread the disease as much as the symptomatic cases. So at this point, I was able to introduce them to the model, and then we had those who were detected. Okay, some other modelers at the beginning were not making the models as complicated as this. They were just making them SIR, models. But on the left, on the right, you see I've introduced parameters that take care of social distancing, use of face mask, and other non-pharmaceutical measures. Okay, this was at that time. This is the reproduction number of the model. Again, this is what represents the average number of secondary infections generated by those who are asymptomatic or those who are symptomatic within the population. Now, generally, we know that if this RC, that's the control reproduction number, is less than 1, then we expect the disease to die. The epidemic will stop. But if it's greater than 1, it will grow. However, for an epidemic, we expect that regardless of whether it's greater than 1 or less than 1, it will still die. You should know why. Because if the disease invades the population, gets the disease, then there will be no susceptible person to be infected, and then we all go away. This picture is just demonstrating how the reproduction number, how you view it pictorially. So one sick person is the red button. So you can see the red button infects 2 persons like this and this. Then the new cases will infect another 2, and so on and so forth. But if you have immune people, like people who are vaccinated, these people on yellow, then you discover that the reproduction number, although it's 2, but you expect that the transmission rate will be very slow because of the involvement of these partially immune people within the population. And I'm not going to show all of the mathematical analysis, no need. I'm just going to demonstrate a few results we got that was so helpful to those in public health at that time. When we carried out the sensitivity analysis of that model, we were able to identify only 4 parameters that were crucial in affecting the reproduction number. And the beauty of it all was, as at this time, those statistics were also trying to work out the reproduction number. And interestingly, we all approximately got the same thing. I'm going to show you that later on. So the 4 parameters that affected the reproduction number are the transmission rate, which is very difficult to estimate, the detection rate. At that time, the testing was very low. So we recommended to them that they just have to increase testing, especially because of the asymptomatic class. And the last parameter is the relative infectiousness of those who are symptomatic. This was not also properly understood by those in biology, but we suggested to them. That's one of the beauty of modeling. Modeling allows you to come up with suggestions, things that can help those in biology understand what is going on and work, effectively. So we suggested these 4 parameters to them, that if we can get a hold on the asymptomatic classes and then understand clearly their level of infectiousness compared to those who are infectious, then it will be very easy for us to know what is going on in the population and bring the disease under control. Now, when we fitted our model to the Lagos data, because we believe the Lagos data was more meaningful, even though it wasn't enough, but we had to work with what we had. I don't want to go into the politics of data collection now. And you can see we had a good fit. The blue line represents the solution from our model, and where the red dot represents the data collected for Lagos. So you can see a fairly good fit. And with this fit, we try to estimate, like I said, 3 very crucial parameters. The first one is the transmission rate. The second one is the detection rate for those who are asymptomatic. And the third one is the detection rate for those who are asymptomatic and symptomatic. And then at the time, we also tried to see if we could estimate those cases, the cases of asymptomatic people at the time the infection started in Lagos. And this is not easy to do. It's not easy to do because when somebody reports himself having a disease, you have no idea how many people behind him already have a immune population that are not even known at the time. But we tried our luck and see if we could estimate that. All right, so this were some of the results we got. We used 3 different data sets for our parameter estimations. The first one was the cumulative number of reported cases. We got this from the NCDC website. Then the number of active cases. All of these are for Lagos. Then the cumulative number of reported cases and number of active cases. Now, when we did that, you observe that the transmission rate was relatively the same, which is very interesting. I mean, this is one of the most exciting results that we got. Relatively the same. The detection rate was very low, which is showing truly what is happening in Lagos. It was really low. You can see 1.89 times 10 to the power minus 12, almost close to 0, because the testing was so low at the time. Then the other detection rate was, you can see, is also not that bad, but it's better than the one for the asymptomatic, because these ones are for those who are already showing signs. But this is the most interesting part. When we tried estimating those who we feel already had infection at the beginning of the announcement of cases in Lagos, you can see there are very huge differences, okay? Look at E0, for example. E represents the latent classes. You can see the difference is huge. The asymptomatic can see different. But look at the reproduction number. This is the power of mathematics. Look at the reproduction number. It's close, approximately 2. And this was exactly what was reported by several other papers at that time for Lagos, which made us believe that our model is really behaving well. Made us believe our model is behaving well. Because the production about 2.016, 2.00, I mean, is using the 3 different data sets. But the problem we had now was that because we don't have enough data on the actual population that was infected at the beginning of that announcement, then we knew that if we don't act very fast, we'll be in trouble. We may be announcing results that are not really showing what is happening on ground. So what did I do, myself and my partner? What we did was to now vary the detection rate and see how that will allow us to see the peak period. Ladies and gentlemen, when we say peak period, we're talking of this height. Now you can see 4 different peaks here. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that as we keep increasing this, the peaks differ. But of course, our interest is not only in the peak, but the time it takes to get to the peak. Take a look at this the one below the blue line. You can see we got to a peak almost at the same time with the one with the blue line, but it's much lower, which is what we want. It's much lower, okay? Because once you achieve the peak and it start coming down, then you believe that the production number, I mean, at that time the production number is now less than 1. Okay, we did that for the number of symptomatic cases and the number of asymptomatic cases. Then we also did some contour plots investigating how social distancing and use of face masks and the detection rate can affect the burden of the disease. And it was here we worked out the figures that Dr. Anamashang mentioned earlier, where we said if at least 55% of the population maintain social distancing and at least 60% use face masks, then we expect the disease to die out. Now, what we did here was now to run about 6 different fits, what we refer to as best fit. Again, you discover that the reproduction numbers are approximately the same. You can look at this part. You may be wondering why I'm always making a reproduction number. But ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most important things you need. You can't even understand the dynamics of a pandemic or an epidemic without understanding this number. And this is the first thing you have to present to those in public health, because this tells me that on the average, 1 sick person is affecting 2. And that's not good. That's not good at all, because it grows exponentially on a rapid case. And if you look down, you see the figures are almost the same. Again, it was the number of those at the beginning of the epidemic that are varying significantly, which further shows that if you don't have a very good information on this, if you don't have the proper testing policy on ground, then the figures you are announcing may just be meaningless as to the number of cases that are within the state. You can see this picture showing us very clearly the effect of the different fits, again affected by the variation, significant variation in the number of assumed people who were infected at the beginning of the localized epidemic. So you can see how varied it is, So this further shows again that this was what I reported to the NCDC then, that the figures were announcing all over the place, Lagos, Kano, Kaduna, and so on and so forth. These things may not be reflecting the true position of what is going on ground, what is happening on ground, because testing was so low at the time, the detection was so low at the time, and we were so confident that what we were saying were true. But with this result from the model analysis, we were able to convince them that we need to dig more into the population and get a lot of people tested. In fact, at that time, I suggested to them they should do random testing. I suggested to them, especially for Lagos, that they should just go into a local government and do random testing. We know it may be expensive, but just try it. That was my suggestion. Just try it. And I think when they did that, they discovered very high number of asymptomatic cases. I forgot the local government in Lagos, very high number of asymptomatic cases. And it wasn't, and I told them, you see, that's the beauty of model now. You have tried it and you have now seen that what you are reporting is actually not what is really happening in the field. So these are some of the results, like I said, the percentage of the population, if we comply, because that's the beauty, is suggesting if we comply. Now, what about the present? So that's the past. What has happened? At the present, we are not talking about increased interest in production of novel drugs for COVID-19 treatment. Vaccination is now available. And because of this, new models have to come up. And the new models were based on extensions of the basic models, all right? And some of the issues considered by the new models are, you now look at heterogeneously mixed in population, because now, because of our understanding of the disease, there are a lot of heterogeneities within the population. We now know that some people could have mild symptoms, others could have very serious signs of the disease. The age variations, there were differences in the way the disease behaves among different age groups. The older ones were having it more, and so on and so forth. So you have to include that. Then control measures were now relaxed, so you have to show the effect of that. Migration was not taking place, people could not travel. And then, like I said, vaccination, where we're talking about the base vaccines and the booster vaccines, we're not able to calculate the herd immunity threshold, which gives us the proportion of the population that to be vaccinated. And in our model, the new model we now came up with, we were looking at the effect of these three vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And then we also talked about vaccine hesitancy. Like my friend just said now, vaccine hesitancy was and it's still a problem anyway. So we had to check the effect of that. And we came up with this nice paper, my friend and my colleagues, this nice paper to see how multi-vaccination was affecting the disease. And one of the numerical results we obtained was this fine backup application diagram, which showed that the reproduction number may no longer be sufficient in determining disease control. All right. So at this stage, even though you have vaccination within the population, it does not guarantee that the disease will die out. So we have to look at those parameters that were actually affecting that to happen. Now, because at the time we didn't have enough data for Nigeria, we had to use the one for Texas. Because the US had very good data set, so we have to use that data set for model fitting. And you can see a very nice fitting here. Look, we're comparing the Pfizer vaccination data to our model data for the cumulative number of those vaccinated, and you can see a very good fit here. For the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson, we had a very good data fit for the Moderna. Johnson & Johnson, we're not too good at this point, but not bad because of what we had. This is what we could get. For Texas, I'm talking about Texas now, because we didn't have this for Nigeria. All right, with the data fitting done, you could see that the Pfizer vaccine, when it was implemented, the peak period was reduced, although when it wasn't implemented, it was extended and a bit high. That's for symptomatic cases with severe COVID-19. Don't forget, the vaccine was not meant or was not designed to prevent infection. I mean, it was generally meant to prevent serious illness, because those vaccinated, some of them still got the disease, but they were not that sick to be hospitalized. We saw that for the Johnson & Johnson case. You can see it's a bit different. It's much higher than that of the Pfizer vaccine. Again, it was because of the data we had, and this showed that the Pfizer was doing so well. Just a few. I don't have much time. I'm seeing Dr. Larry looking at his clock. So these are just a few results. So if you guys want to know more about this, you can check this paper up. Now let's talk about future preparedness. So what do we learn from all of this? What do we learn from the results? Like I said, our key aim in modeling is to identify parameters, key parameters and variables that could guide those in epidemiology. Now, these parameters we have gotten, how could they be of help to prepare for the future? One, what is our degree of interaction with the environment, which could result in individuals picking up deadly pathogens, especially when we talk about zoonotic diseases? Okay, so how prepared are we? What's the degree? Because tomorrow we could just relate to the environment, and before you know it, you pick up another disease, and we have an epidemic starting all over again. So how prepared are we? We have identified key parameters that could be of help as we prepare for the next pandemic. These parameters are key, and we have shared it with those in public health. So we don't have to wait for the next pandemic and then start this thing all over again. Okay, we just have to start preparing. Do we manufacture vaccines in this country? Do we manufacture vaccines in this country? Do we develop vaccines? Or we wait for others to do it for us? Isolation centers, bed spaces. Do we have to wait until something terrible is happening before we start arranging these things? COVID-19 has taught us a big lesson. And the lockdown taught virtually everyone, including government officials, big lessons, because many people couldn't travel. Many of us couldn't travel. Now we have to make do with what we have. And that is why these parameters, when we throw it up to those in public health, they have to take them seriously and prepare for what is going to come up in the future. Could the disease end up being periodic? That is, could it become seasonal, comes and go? How propagation analysis and mathematics will help us identify parameters that can cause such to happen. And once we identify these parameters, again, we share with those in public health so that they can work towards understanding that parameter in detail. You know, one of those things those in public health always tell me whenever we have discussions is, Prof, you mathematicians, you always tell us what we don't know. But that's the idea, that's the point. I'm trying to prove to you that solving a particular problem is just beyond those in a particular field. You need a collaboration between so many different people. And when you bring them together, you see that it's very easy for you to deal with the problems that you are facing. I'm going to conclude with this slide for us to understand why disease modeling is very important. It's cost effective. So I can sit in my room, get information I need, set up a model, feed to data, explain what I'm seeing, and discuss with my people, those in public health. It's highly interdisciplinary, so you have to work with a lot of people. Those in computer science, my friend talked about AI, machine learning, and so on. So you have to work with so many people, statisticians, public health, those in medicine, economics, and so on, so that you can fully have a grasp of what is going on. Then there are so much job opportunity for those who are modelers. And finally, as far as we still live in this world, diseases will always be around, at least for now. So modelers will always be in business. We'll never be out of business as far as we have disease. We have a lot of work to do. I believe when modelers collaborate with those who are necessary to collaborate with when we have disease outbreaks, then it is possible for us to deal with the problems that we are having. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed my little presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Oh, thank you very much, sir, for that powerful presentation. So we shall now proceed to the next stage, which is question and answer. So we shall proceed to the number 6 item on the agenda. So, but before we proceed, I would like to first of all invite Mr. Nazir Mr. Halliru Nazir to answer this question. There's a question here that, could you please tell us more about geospatial data? That is the first question.
Yeah.
Mr. Halliru, okay, thank you very much, sir. The question now is that, could you please tell us more about geospatial data? Is there anything you can use to really explain to us better?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac. So when we talk about geospatial data, it means any data set that has a geolocation, any data set with latitude and longitude coordinates that you can specifically say this is the location of a particular, infrastructure, or this is the location or geographic location of a particular settlement. So that is geospatial data. So any data that has the attribute of geolocation, that you can specifically mention that this is where this infrastructure is located. So that's, to simply put it, that's what's called geospatial data. And it can be, on on different forms. We have various types. We have vector layer, and then we have raster. So vector layer, which has to do, with points, point location, and also raster, which has to do with more of geographical location and all that.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. We'll come back to you later. And there's another question here for Professor Daniel. That's from Nasirat Ndurema. Nasirat Ndurema asked a question. She was like, sir, can you explain lab-knowledge function? That is there any other way you can help her to understand what is meant by lab-knowledge function? Professor Daniel?
Okay, all right, that's a good question. Well,
yes, Nasirat Ndurema asked the question, sir.
Nasirat, nice hearing from you. So you're taking me to an area now where I have to be very, very mathematical. And like I said, because of this audience that is a general, this is a general audience that have a lot of people who are mathematicians. Okay, let me just, I want to put it in a way that everyone will understand. All right, so a lab-knowledge function is a functional, it's actually a functional, not just a function, it's a functional that we normally use in gaining understanding on the long-term dynamics of equilibrium points, equilibrium states. An example of an equilibrium state would be a disease-free equilibrium. That is a point, a state where there is no disease, which we hope for in disease modeling. We don't want the disease to be there, so it's a stable, it can't happen automatically. So the point now is this: if I initiate a system, that is when I solve a system and I pick the initial condition from anywhere. For example, if the number of affected people are very few, or the people who are affected are very many, the point now is either way, will I achieve that equilibrium state of letting the disease die? Mathematically, I can investigate that epidemiological information using a lab-knowledge function. If the lab-knowledge function is simply a function that one is positive definite, and secondly, it is semi-negative definite. That's the derivative, the first derivative of it. And the purpose why we check that is you are looking at the concept of a trajectory that comes from within a manifold. I'm not going into mathematical terms now. Within a manifold, and that trajectory approaches an equilibrium state, regardless of where you start that trajectory from. So the lab-knowledge function will, once you take the derivative, and then because it's a function of those state variables, those various classes of that you have in your model, then you can now prove if, regardless of where you initiate your state, the disease now dies out. The problem you always have is constructing that functional. It's not a trivial thing. It takes a lot of experience, it takes a lot of hard work, but it can be done. I mean, I've taught many people other different mathematical modeling courses, how you construct lab-knowledge functions for different models, either epidemic models or even endemic models. So basically, we use it in epidemiology for investigating the long-term global dynamics of equilibrium states. I hope that is clear enough for this audience.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. You said it all. Thank you very much, sir. Now, I will now call upon our president, Dr. Hawa Mohammed. He would like to ask a question like, Dr. Hawa, are you around?
Yes, can you hear me?
Please, yes, we can all hear you. Please,
okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. In fact, like I said, the presentations were truly very interesting. I never know that I will understand mathematics like you did, Professor Okuonghae. Yes, thank you. But I think my question largely will go to Mr. Halliru, and then maybe Professor Okuonghae may also say something. Mr. Halliru, I'm concerned about, or I'm interested in that your earlier slide where you showed the components that you followed, the order that you used, the main components that you used in taking the geospatial data. There's issue of exposure, the issue of the exposure. Then the last one is the issue of comorbidity. So I was just interested that there is an aspect that was very important at the pandemic, during the pandemic, and it may as well be important in future pandemic. And you seem not to have, or the committee, or rather the analysts did not consider it. And that is the issue of fake news. Even though I know there is communication aspects, somewhere, I think that is, it was number 3 among the components you shared, but among the components, thank you, is number 3, I'm happy I'm right, is number 3, that is communication. But among the subcomponents, I think something important, especially fake news, was missing. And personally, I thought it's something that was very, very important, and it will also be very important in future, especially in addressing future pandemics. So I was wondering why that was omitted. That was one aspect that I think perhaps Mr. Nazir can help answer. And also to Professor Okuonghae, in all your modelings, as if you also don't factor that into consideration, except if I missed that. So that is one thing that I also want to ask. Now, the second issue also goes to Mr. Nazir, that I also hope that Professor Okuonghae may also chip in something, whether why they also don't consider it. Is the issue of the scientific strength of the country. And I think in responding to pandemic, as if the scientific strength of the country may also be, like I said, it's I'm not sure, that's why I'm asking, may also be a very important variable or parameter. And it seems to be missing in the entire chain of your spatial data collection. So I wanted to know why that is missing. I said scientific strength. I mean, yeah, you can start from basic science to the applied science. I think those things are important in an attempt to curtail a pandemic. And I think it's completely missing. And the chart you are showing, this component is as if it's showing that scientific strength or knowledge generation of your country is completely unimportant, seems to be completely unimportant as far as curtailing pandemic is concerned. So that's why I was wondering why those two things are missing. If you can, except if I missed something, if you can shed more light on that, because I personally think they may be important in preventing future pandemics. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for the question. Please, let me start with Professor Daniel. Professor Daniel, would you like to respond to that, sir?
All right. Yeah, very, very well. Let's start with the first one, fake news. I alluded to it when I was talking about the present vaccine hesitancy, for example. In fact, there's a project we're doing now. The effect of vaccine hesitancy on the ongoing vaccination program itself. Why are people hesitant? Because of news, fake news. One other project we had already started was looking at the effect of culture, media, on whether people even believe there is COVID-19 in the first place. Okay, these things have been, we have factored them in. We have looked at the effect because we discovered one thing. At some point in Nigeria, people didn't even believe there was corona, there was COVID-19. You were hearing government officials even saying it on television that there was nothing like that. And that was affecting, the control measures, non-pharmaceutical control measures that were being put in place. When the vaccine came up, people were also hearing a lot of things. So we have actually factored in such parameters. The challenge you face when you are modeling is data collection and parameter estimation. So even if I factor in, say, the effect of fake news on vaccine hesitancy, for instance, that particular parameter, I will need very nice data to help me get that. And at the moment, we have already started a project. We hope that we can get funding for that project, where we are going to go into the field. We're going to go into the field and get direct information from the field and see how we can this information will help us estimate properly that particular parameter. So yes, we have actually considered that during the course of our studies. The second thing you talked about is on the issue of capacity of scientists in the country. I don't know, I think something like that, capacity of scientists in the country to deal with epidemics and pandemics. I think something like that. Am I right? Capacity of
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're right, sir.
Again, good. Most of you who know me here know me as a very, very blunt person. So I'm going to be very blunt on that issue. Nigeria has all it takes to deal with any problem it has. I repeat, Nigeria has all it takes to deal with any problem it has. You know, why I'm this bold and confident is I've had interactions with those in public health. Like I told you before, I've discussed with the Epidemiologist General of Nigeria during the meningitis outbreak when he asked my opinion on what was going on and I should come in to work with them on the modeling project. There are so many things I discovered when I engage in discussing with epidemiologists and we discuss in Nigeria with public health officials, and I can't share them on this because this is a live program. You'll be sad as to how government officials sometimes handle scientific findings and research. I can't say them here, but you'll be sad. If I say some, you will be shocked. That is, it's like some people just feed on, let there be issues. When I went to Barcelona, that TB conference I said I was invited as one of the modelers, the mathematical modeling part of that World Lung Health Conference. I was invited by a TB unit in Barcelona. They have never met me before. In fact, when they saw me for the first time, they were shocked because they felt they were going to see an old man. Not knowing they were seeing a young, then I was an associate professor, a young man. When I got to the Barcelona Convention Center, that was where the conference took place, a very big place. I met the contingent of the Stop TB program from Nigeria, a very large contingent. They were surprised to see a Nigerian mathematician making a presentation on TB control. I spoke with some members from Edo State who were part of that team. It's a large contingent. You know, Nigerians will travel big. And they were surprised. Funny enough, the people who invited me have not seen me. Those outside the country saw my works online, invited me. But those in Nigeria were not aware of such. Now, how do we explain that? Is it not the same internet that we all use? So like I said, the capacity to deal with issues, we have them here. It's like remembering the presentation of Professor Tomori. I still have that video on my phone. That one day was crying on channels. You know, when he was crying about, Professor Tomori is somebody I respect a lot. I have had some detailed discussions with that man. Whenever he talks of Lassa fever here, the man almost goes to tears. This is a man who has competed so much in working with Lassa fever, and he has suggested how we have the capacity. Factoring into our model is so easy. Just 1 minus alpha. Let alpha represent the capacity of scientists in Nigeria. It lies between 0 and 1. And I want to say it's about 80%. We have it. But the question is, are we utilizing it? The policymakers, are they allowing this to be well utilized? I love the speech of my friend Halliru, you know, the spatial distribution, because of course, this spatial distribution will give us enough information in our modeling. But the point is, when we have this information, is it even used? So it's sometimes very painful. When you have so much knowledge, you have so much to share, but the system don't allow you to use it. So we're more like generating knowledge, generating information that is not being used. So we hope it changes. Honestly, my friends, we hope it changes. That all the beautiful information we have can be put to good use. I hope.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for that wonderful response. Mr. Halliru, would you like to say something? Mr.
Yeah,
Halliru,
sure.
are you there? Okay, please,
yeah,
you have the floor.
I would like to. Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac, and thank you, Dr. Awal, for the question and the observation why fake news was not included into the communication access risk layer. So actually, these risk layers were based on different input data sets. And one of them, apart from the population estimates, which we use to generate the risk population, we also use the NDHS survey, to predict population that are at risk in terms of communication access into the connectivity, access to media, consumption of media. But of course, we understand fake news is one of those critical aspects that will be used in order to address issues around communications for COVID-19 response. And then data were not available to be imputed into the model, to generate these predictions. However, there were other, strategies that the advocacy and communication teams have used, in order to address issues of fake news through various channels, through conventional media, traditional media, in order to address that. And it has really proved a lot of evidence for addressing that. And in terms of the second question for countries' capabilities and in some of the scientific approach, yes, to some extent during the COVID outbreak in 2020. So our collaboration through the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, we were able to really work very, very closely with the NCDC, and NCDC proved their competence in terms of using some of the core geospatial data layers for us to for them to analyze where the cases are, in terms of their locations, and they use the administrative boundaries to determine how spread the cases were at the ward level and how the spread of the cases were at the LGA level. So we really valued that. And also the National Bureau of Statistics, they were also involved in terms of creating dashboards, in terms of creating data analytics to really do some form of scientific evidence to provide data and data analysis for decision making. So these were some of the things that we've learned and that we have experienced over the period, and they have really helped in terms of the response to the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
This is,
sir?
Yeah, Murtala speaking. Can I say something, please?
Yes, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor and Mr. Nazir. I think I'm the webinar committee chairman, and I'm suggesting something. I believe something is happening that we have never had. Usually in all the other webinars, we finish exactly 90 minutes, but I'm proposing that for today's, we extend it by 10 minutes because we're having some really, really engaging discussions and the time is running out or not. So I'm suggesting if you agree to add 10 more minutes so that we cover other questions and then before we have the closing remarks. What do you think?
Okay, that's okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
I hope we are not inconveniencing Professor Daniel and Mr. Halliru.
No, you're not inconveniencing me. I can be here for 1 hour.
Thank you. Thank you, bro. Thank
well,
you,
okay, sir.
Yeah,
okay,
for me,
now,
add 10 minutes, 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, there's another question from Patricia Otto. The question says, what data types are required from epidemiologists in different disease scenarios? I think Professor Daniel, Patricia is asking the question that what data types are required from epidemiologists in different disease scenarios?
Okay. Usually, the most basic of all data sets you have is the number of reported cases. That's where you start from. NCDC, they were announcing these things every day. Today, 300 new cases, 2 hospitalized, and so on. So the number of new cases are key because that gives us an idea of the incidence, and that's one data set we don't joke with. So cumulatively, we'll calculate that cumulatively, and then use that for our model fitting. Another important data that we normally use, but we don't have enough of that in Nigeria, especially during at the beginning of the COVID problem up till 2021, is the number of deaths. Now I know deaths were reported, but we were not trusting those figures, whether that those figures were actually correct. They could be much higher than what was being reported. So we relied mostly on the cumulative number of reported cases. Then another data set we normally use is the number of active cases, that those persons who are still sick, who have not yet recovered. Now, this is in a situation where there are no serious control measures like vaccination. So these two are very, very important. The number of reported cases, new cases now, and then the number of active cases, those ones that are still infected and have not been cured. Now, when you introduce vaccination, for example, as a control measure, then you have to start monitoring the number of people who have been vaccinated. You need that data. And then from that data, you could now redesign your model and see if vaccination is changing the course, for example, the peak period and the entire course of the epidemic or the pandemic. So these three are key. I repeat, the number of reported cases, that's new cases, the number of active cases, those who are still having the disease, and then if you are vaccinated people, the number of people who have already been vaccinated, You can use these three as very good data set for model fitting.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, let me back to Mr. Nazir Halliru. There's a question here that the question says, apart from COVID-19, is there any other problem that you've been able to solve in Nigeria within the scope of geospatial data? Let me say it again, that is there any other, apart from COVID-19, that you should tell us more about solved problems using geospatial data in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Isaac. Yeah, apart from COVID-19 and even beyond health, although within the health space, we are engaged in various activities which we have seen the values that geospatial data is bringing on the table. But to move away from the health space, we have used also geospatial data in order to determine locations where government can establish schools or alternate school program where it will address the out-of-school children. The Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development have used, what is called the school location, and also an algorithm that we generated that shows where we need to have additional schools based on our population density and based on our population estimates, especially for children, 5 to 10 years, 5 to 15 years, that are supposed to be in schools, but they are not in schools. So these maps have really helped to show where do we need to put these schools and where do we need to create additional schools so that no child should travel, more than 2 kilometers in order to access school. In order to access a school. That's one part. The second aspect I want to also highlight is that we've used some of this data set in the agricultural space. And in the agricultural space, in terms of establishing a use case for distance between farmlands and markets. So there were a lot of issues then around post-harvest losses and, farmers producing their produce, and before taking them into the market, they have maybe some accident, or if they are perishable goods, they perish on the road and all that. So we use the point layers of farmlands and also market in order to establish rural roads where these farmers can transport their produce from the farmlands to the market, for them to really have that opportunity. So there were a lot of other various cases, in terms of financial inclusion, in energy space, as well as further use cases on education. But of course, the value or the power of geospatial data is much, much beyond the COVID-19 space, and also beyond, the health space, because it provides these different core data layers, and depending on the analysis that, you want to do, and especially, using the population estimate, using the population layer, which will be a common denominator for any intervention that you plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Before then, Prof. Daniel, there is someone here that would like to receive your contact. I will do justice to that. And there's another question here. You said that he would like you to mentor him or her. So I'll connect you. Now, there's another question here from Yusuf. The question is open. The question says, is it possible to predict the next outbreak? And what is going to be the nature of such outbreak? Although Dr. Issa Bindawa would like to answer the question, but let me first of all ask Prof. Daniel and then Mr. Nazir. Mr. Halliru, is there any response to that? Is it possible to predict the next outbreak? And what is going to be the nature of the outbreak?
All right, are you talking of the next outbreak of COVID?
Outbreak.
Of COVID, yeah, or
of COVID-19 or any other diseases? Is it possible to predict?
All right. In one of the slides I was showing, I was trying to prove that mathematically you can prove or identify parameters that would cause a reoccurrence of a previous epidemic. We can do that mathematically. In fact, we can mathematically show whether, before you know it, conditions that will allow the disease settle into a periodic state it will come and go, come and go, come and go, and before you know it becomes periodic. Yes, it can be done mathematically. We have done that for several diseases. All we need to do is just carry out some mathematical analysis and then try to identify 1 or 2 key parameters. And then we suggest these parameters to those in epidemiology and tell them if you can work these parameters out from data collected from the field, then you could be on a time bomb. So yes, you can prevent an occurrence. You can actually make sure it doesn't happen again if you put certain things in place. But at the same time, mathematically, we can show and predict whether these things can come up again. Yes, that can be done.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. There's another question here from Dr. Temitope Jayola. The question says, I observed that the models discussed by Professor Daniel in his presentation were systems of differential equations. Now, what other forms of models are associated with the coronavirus in its latest mathematical studies?
Okay, well, there are different paradigms of modeling in disease modeling generally. So the question should be, why do we love using differential equations? I mean, Jayola is a mathematician, so he understands. This anything dynamics involves things that changes with time and space. And one of the most powerful, I repeat, tool in science generally for understanding anything dynamical differential equations. Not only ordinary differential equations. Actually, we can also use partial differential equations in understanding the dynamics of COVID, especially when you now introduce spatial variables into the model, and that can be done. Starting with the landmark work of McKendrick, Kemak, and the rest of them, over 100 years ago. Differential equations have been very, very useful because we treat it dynamically. Now, even when you use differential equations, you have to still worry whether you'll be using deterministic differential equations or stochastic, because you should worry if there are a measure of randomness in what is going on within the given population. And if there are, especially when it affects the transmission rate, then you can't use the kind of equations I've used there. In one of the works I did not too long ago, I was trying to demonstrate the effect of 3 different sources of noise, 3 different sources of random noise on the dynamics of an SIR disease. You can check my work on ResearchGate and you see the paper there. And so, yes, but basically because these things are dynamical in nature, we tend to use mathematical tools that are also dynamic in nature, that can explain things that are dynamic. And differential equations are very, very powerful tools. Now, beyond that, there are other statisticians who make use of generalized linear models too for understanding the patterns of disease transmission patterns. Again, these are actually not treated dynamically, but they are treated as static problems. By static, I mean what is happening in this place. Now, when I move to so place, what happens there? I don't bother about the time it takes me to get to that place. So in that case, people could make use of Markov processes to, especially when again you believe that randomness in the system, so you can use Markov models to handle that. There are other tools outside mathematics, like computational tools that you can also use. But we are fond of, majority of us are fond of, when I say majority, a very large proportion of modelers around the world are fond of using differential equations because that is the most direct tool that you use for anything that is dynamical and can also be affected by space. But don't be fooled by that innocent looking equation. Don't be fooled by it. If you go into carrying out, for example, a Hopf application analysis on that thing, you will see that it's not a trivial exercise at all. So, because these parameters need to be gotten out, and this analysis will help us understand them well.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. At this point, I think.
Can I add on the question I asked? I told you I was going to say something.
Okay, please, sir, you can speak, sir.
Yeah.
Just one minute, sir. 1 minute. 1 minute.
I'm interested in answering it because it's very key to a lot of things. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. So I said the reason why I really want to say this is because it's tied to a lot of things that we have discussed in this webinar and the other ones. Because if you remember in 2014, after the Ebola scare, there was a TED Talk, which was not viewed a lot at that time by Bill Gates regarding the next pandemic. He clearly actually said what is next, that there's something about that, what's next to the pandemic, we are not ready. So in that TED Talk, if you have watched it, I'm going to share a link for especially the person who asked the question, Mr. Yusuf. You see that there is actually a clear prediction of a viral infection that is respiratory that will cause a pandemic. And what is the response of people to that video? A lot of what we have been saying about fake news, it's been shared as an argument against preparedness, that they know that there is going to be COVID-19, that is why he had that TED Talk. So you can see it's now tied to Prof. Daniel's suggestion that people don't really care about what science is saying. But scientifically speaking, we know exactly the dangers that are facing us. Even in the next 10, 20, 30 years, there are a lot of predictions of what may come. But it's the attitude of people towards the prediction that are not really at par with the science about it. But with regard to your question, yes, there are ways to predict, but then the response is what matters, and that's where we are all like. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a very wonderful day, and I really appreciate the presentation by Professor Daniel and then Mr. Nazir Halliru. So at this stage now, I would like to invite the webinar committee chairman for vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Isaac. It's really a very, very wonderful, very, very vibrant webinar we had today. We actually had to, you can see, we had to add some time to it. And I would like to thank our speakers for today, Professor Daniel and Nazir Halliru. Professor Daniel mentioned something that I would like to say, that we actually discovered for you, Prof, we know someone who knows you, we are linked to you, but for Mr. Halliru, I can say that we actually discovered him online as well. So I think NYA is doing what the media should be doing in Nigeria. So we discovered him online and we actually we had to go through some hassles to get his contact. So we got his contact and you can see that we actually were right. The kind of presentation he gave and what he offered is really, really massive. So I thank you very, very much, Prof. When I had that, I was actually, Prof is in, he doesn't know that, but he's actually hailing NYA for doing a good job on that aspect. So we really, really appreciate your presentation. And for Prof. Daniel, it's actually a lecture, presentation and a lecture at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for a wonderful presentation, Mr. Nazir. We also appreciate you. And as I always say to all our speakers, we hope that you will leave your doors open if we need anything, because we are coming back in the future if there is anything. And to the participants of today, without you, this cannot be possible. And we always say that we appreciate your attendance and we appreciate your questions. And we hope that you are enjoying what we are doing. And like I said in one of the replies I did in the comment section, you can always like our YouTube page, and we have a lot of talks by experts. This is a webinar series. This is the 6th one. We started in January and we are now in June. So we are going to have 2 more. In July, we are going to be in collaboration with the Benin Academy of Science, New York Academy of Science, who actually we collaborated with in previous months to deliver one of the webinars. So we are going to also collaborate with them in July. Then August, which we hope is going to be the final in the COVID-19 series, we are going to have very, very interesting speakers to join us in delivering, in closing the webinar series on the COVID-19 as part of the Africa Rapid Grant that we got. So at this juncture, I would also like to thank our funders under the Africa Rapid Grant Fund, who actually funded the webinar series and other activities of NYA in this year. Thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance. We appreciate your presentations. We appreciate you, Dr. Isaac, as well. We hope that you are going to join us in our remaining webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. So thank you very much, Prof. Daniel. Thank you, sir.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you very much. We are very happy to see you here, sir. Thank you very much.
Cody, a good one from you. Professor Daniel, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Nazir, thank you.
Sir. Thank you, sir. That's my friend, Dr. Abdulaziz.
You are now seeing me now. Your eyes have been very, very, close before.
Let me see your face. Oh, I could see it. That's it. Well done, sir.
Prof, well
Well done,
done.
sir. Well done.
Thank you, Dr. Ajoni. It's nice